Mary Scifres for Mary Scifres Ministries here to talk with you about creative worship made easy and our themes for Easter 2020. It's been an interesting writing season for my team and I as we have rewritten all of the Easter materials with this current pandemic crisis in mind. Even so, we know this is a season when we still can celebrate life, for even in the midst of death, we are promised that God is our refuge and our fortress. And even in the face of death, Jesus continued to proclaim new life, calling his followers to trust in the possibility of life, even when facing tragedy, despair, and death. And so we embrace the possibility of new life and the promise of resurrection in both of our series for this Easter season. The first series continues the one begun in Lent, Meeting Jesus. This series for Easter, though, is full of resurrection appearances, some of them lectionary-based, some of them not lectionary-based, but we'll take you through a series of meeting Jesus opportunities that those first disciples had in their encounters with the risen Christ. We start with meeting Jesus in the garden, continuing on with Thomas' story, meeting Jesus in our doubts, and then the walk to Emmaus story and those two disciples meeting Jesus in the breaking of the bread. This is when we start going off lectionary in week 4 on May 3rd, meeting Jesus where it all began. And we take that story of Jesus by the seashore in John chapter 21 and break it down over 2 weeks. The first being when the disciples get to have breakfast with Jesus. And then the next week when Peter gets to meet Jesus in his second chance. Meeting Jesus in our second chances, an opportunity to think about when Jesus calls to Peter 3 times to feed and tend the flock of God. We then continue back to the lectionary, meeting Jesus in our fears, using Luke 24, and then the blessing of meeting Jesus, continuing on with Ascension readings, and finally, meeting Jesus in the Holy Spirit for Pentecost Sunday. Now, if you want to stay strictly lectionary, we encourage you to look at our Acts-based series, which we have cleverly called The Church in Action. Okay, it's not a very good pun, but we wanted to have something about how we can be doing something in response to being followers of Jesus. And no other book in the Bible captures this more vividly than the book of Acts. And so we begin with witnesses to the resurrection on Easter 2, and then continuing, turning to God. Continuing with Acts chapter 2, but the end of the verse. And finally, Acts chapter 2, one more week devoted to fellowship. So 3 weeks where you get to work through what happens after that first Pentecost as the church begins its mission. And then we skip to the lectionary reading of Acts chapter 10 and calling that Sharing God's Love for All. Then continuing on with Acts 17, preaching to all the nations, and then back to our resurrection readings on Ascension Sunday, witnesses to all the world, back at Acts chapter 1. And on Pentecost Sunday, empowered by the Spirit. Whether you're going to be talking about the church in action or meeting Jesus in resurrection appearances, we think you'll find this year's themes, this year's creative ideas, sermon starters, and words for worship incredibly useful. In this busy time, everything is licensed for your streaming, recording, or printing and distributing through your email system, or if we get the opportunity to gather again for live worship, of course, everything is licensed for you to use in your bulletins and programs. Our prayers and thoughts are with all of you. Please remember that we're included with your subscription for this Easter season. We are offering a free technical consult to any subscriber, a full 1-hour consult with my tech team. In case you're struggling with technology, we want to be a resource to you to help you determine the best way to be delivering your message and connecting your people, and the simplest way for you to be connected without being overwhelmed. If I were to give you one message this Easter season, it is, give yourself the gift of life by keeping it simple, doing what you can do, and trusting that God will do the rest. Blessings be with all of you. God's peace and health be with all of you. And I look forward to celebrating a full Easter Sunday when we finally can return and gather in worship in person.